Hi, welcome to my lecture recital. I'll be talking about the formal and stylistic ambiguities and their performance choices in Dmitri Shostakovich's Concerto for Piano, Trumpet, and Strings, Opus 35. Introduction. Dmitri Shostakovich's Concerto for Piano, Trumpet, and Strings, Opus 35, composed in 1933, is a work based on sonata form with culturally integrated topics coupled with chromaticism based on tonality. There is a balance between tradition and innovation in the piece, with references to Haydn and Beethoven on the one hand and an unusual formal structure on the other. Analyzing works composed in this time can be a challenge, as there were numerous styles and compositional methods emerging. However, Shostakovich drew from models of the past, and thus I can present two forms of analysis to look at his music: sonata theory and topic theory. Furthermore, I interpret Shostakovich's use of established forms and styles as a basis for creating humor in this work. Thus, in this lecture, I will showcase how both a sonata theory and topic theory analysis lead to ambiguities in the music, which is a necessary condition for the interpretation of musical humor. These ambiguities and their expressive implications provide knowledge to the performer and listener for tying together the disparate compositional elements while opening interpretative possibilities. After a brief introduction to each of the theories I draw upon, I will select key moments of interest, mostly in the more substantial first and fourth movements that highlight the narrative of humor. My findings correlate with the premise of humor, and more research can further define how it relates to irony, sarcasm, and parody. Sonata theory. Sonata theory, presented by James Hapukoski and Warren Darcy in their influential book published in 2006, Elements of Sonata Theory, Norms, Types, and Deformations in the Late 18th Century Sonata, attempts to define the normative procedures within different zones or action spaces in the late 18th century sonata. It seeks to explain the crucial genre-defining features of sonata form. Metaphorically, it serves as an analogy for disciplined balance action in the world. There are three action spaces in a sonata: the exposition, development, and recapitulation. The exposition presents the structure of promise, defined as the arrangement of rhetorical modules that indicate the journey it desires to take. The goal of the exposition is to arrive at the essential expositional closure, EEC, on a perfect authentic cadence. This journey can be divided into two parts, each with distinct or multiple distinct themes, and is delineated by the medial caesura, MC. See example 1. The primary theme, P, of the exposition presents the first idea and characteristic of the piece. It journeys by way of a transition, TR, to the secondary theme, S, which usually has opposing characteristics. The EEC arrives at the end of the S zone and is followed by the closing zone, C. The P, TR, S, and C zones each has defining characteristics, of which any deviations lead to questions of the composer's intent and their expressive implications. The zones in the exposition are expected to return not only in the recapitulation, but even in the development, with the recapitulation forming the structure of accomplishment. See example 2. Sonata theory is unlike the traditional view of sonata form in that it showcases normative procedures of each action space according to the time of the composition and provides room for what Hapukoski and Darcy call deformations, meaning the stretching or distortion of a norm beyond its understood limits. A deformation does not have a negative connotation, but rather urges one to seek out reasons for its composition. Naturally, when using sonata theory to analyze a 20th century concerto, there are deformations which have precedence in other compositions, and I will not look at those. One example is the attacca indication at the end of all the movements in Shostakovich, which has many precedents in the 19th century and which Sergei Prokofiev used to unite all the movements of his piano concerto in D-flat major, opus 10, composed in 1911, a concerto that was in Shostakovich's repertoire as a pianist. Now I go to topic theory. In topic theory, topics are, quote, subjects for musical discourse, end quote. They were introduced by Leonard Ratner in his seminal book, Classic Music, Expression, Form, and Style. Topics were a source of meaning and means of communication in 18th century music. They are most clearly and often seen as musical styles or genres taken out of their proper context and used in another one. A topic can range from a whole form to the choice of key or instrument. Let me illustrate a topical use of Shostakovich by his inclusion of the trumpet as a partner in a concerto. The trumpet has a traditional role in music as displaying heroism. In Historisch kritisch Beitrage zur Aufnahme der Musik, Marpog wrote that dictators, consuls, praetors, and other military leaders all ostentatiously celebrated their victories with the peal of trumpets. Trumpeters marched in celebratory parades and filled the air with a great din, which the joyful shouts of the people doubled. The stirring sound of the trumpet has a heroic and grand connotation, and though it does not mean that it cannot be used in other contexts, there is still the underlying implication and topic of grandeur. Furthermore, Schubart emphasizes that the trumpet must always retain heroic connotations or, quote, it loses its true character, end quote. The use of the trumpet in any other context may therefore signify simple-mindedness or act as a caricature. In Shostakovich's concerto, the trumpet has a prominent virtuosic role in the fourth movement, and it leads me to believe that Shostakovich is teasing the grandeur of the trumpet by giving it virtuosic, fast, repeated notes at the end of the finale. Incongruity and humor theory. The use and deformations of sonata form and the juxtaposition of contrasting topics leads me to believe that humor is the expressive intention of the concerto. The identification of humor in music is one that requires experience and knowledge in the expectations and traditions of music. Asbjørn Ofthus Eriksson, in his Taxonomy of Humor in Instrumental Music, states that comedy can only arise in a relatively imperfect manner, and thus abstract instrumental music has a great capacity for evoking humorous reactions. Currently, humor theory falls into three general categories: superiority, relief, and incongruity. Superiority theory is when we feel superior to other people or to ourselves in the past, and that makes us laugh. Relief theory is when there is a release of emotional energy through laughter. And relief theory and incongruity theory are related because of the comical effect of perceiving incongruity between constituting elements of a situation. Incongruity theory describes a situation in which things deviate from the way they were supposed to be. These definitions of humor help us understand the prerequisites for humor in general, and we can apply it to understanding music by a relatively recent humor theory by Thomas C. Veitch. Veitch's theory claims to cover all aspects of humor, and it is as follows. The joint and necessary conditions for the perception of humor consist of two parts, V for violation and N for normal. Violation is when the perceiver has in mind a view of the situation as constituting a violation of a, quote, subjective moral principle, end quote. And normal is when the perceiver has in mind a predominating view of a situation as being normal. Humor occurs when things are violated while simultaneously being normal. Both N and V must be in balance for humor to occur because, quote, if nothing appears to be wrong with the situation, it will not be perceived as humorous. Nor will it be humorous if it is interpreted exclusively as a violation, end quote. In music, Eriksson asserts that humor is often created by departing from stylistic norms and by the collisions of conflicting style systems. Therefore, because both sonata form and topics are highly stylized and have clearly defined set of constraints, they are both ideal backgrounds for creating interstylistic humor. Sonata theory and topic theory analysis and their performance implications. So the form of the first movement of the concerto uses the introduction coda frame. After an initial heraldic or annunciatory call to attention, the thematic material that follows is the primary theme P1 and is also an introduction. The material in the introduction returns in a similar form in the coda, with identical melodic and contrapuntal material that differs only near the cadence. See examples 3 and 4. According to Hepekorsky and Darcy, introductions and codas occur in the parageneric spaces, or non-sonata spaces, outside the exposition, development, and recapitulation. That is, they represent a deformation of normative sonata form practice, and thus introductions and codas have expressive connotations. An implication is that the frame can represent a sense of artifice. In Hepekorsky and Darcy's eloquent words, the introduction coda represent the higher reality, under whose more immediate mode of existence, or under whose embracing auspices the sonata form proper is laid out as a contingent process, a demonstration of an artifice that unfolds only under the authority of the prior existence of the frame. Metaphors of narrativity are not inevitably implied, external narrator and the tale told, but in some cases they can spring to mind and appear to be hermeneutically relevant. In this concerto, because of my interpretation of humor and the stylistic incongruities we will later see, I believe that the introduction coda frame is one of the structural markers that Shostakovich uses to create a perspective of distance and frame a narrative voice in the piece. As Hepekorsky and Darcy notes, most verse satires have frames, and it's like having a narrator that views a situation from an outside perspective. Knowing that this frame is not a stylistic norm can allow a performer to emphasize this distinction by imitating a singer in both lines of the introduction to show its narrative quality, and by relating the tempos of both the introduction and the coda. The virtuosic first movement of a concerto has topical relations. The exposition's first topic is usually the march, followed by a TR with a March Brilliant Sturmdrang topic, leading to a singing style topic. March or Brilliant or Sturmdrang topic, leading to a singing style topic. The most common topics are the march and brilliant or display topic. The march topic is, quote, essentially a serious yet brisk, rousing melody, the true place for which is before the troops on the parade ground, according to Matheson in his 1713 Das Neue Eröffnete Orchester. However, one also encounters them in theatrical processions and in suites. The topic of the march creates performance implications because, quote, the character of the true march is brave, bold, and rousing. The performance of it must be forceful. The dotted notes especially call for full and emphatic playing, end quote, according to Daniel Gottlieb Türk in his 1789 Klavierschule. The brilliant topic has its home in the genre of the concerto because it refers to the use of rapid passages for virtuoso display or intense feeling. The march and brilliant topic are both used by Shostakovich in the P and TR zones of the concerto. However, instead of going to a singing style topic in the S zone, there's a drop of energy at the end of the TR that leads to an unusual MC in piano dynamic, and a return of the march topic in forte dynamic in the S zone. According to Hepekorsky and Darcy, any flagging of energy or vigor within TR, any diminuendo or faltering drop to piano is countergeneric and constitutes an event that invites interpretation. It may suggest the production of something unusual, a medial sussurra deformation, or the presence of a troubled expressive problem being unfolded in the musical narrative. The drop in dynamic at the end of the TR creates two interesting situations in this case. First, it allows the S team to enter in with a boisterous, rousing march topic, which seems to compensate and balance out the slower introduction of the movement. And second, in the recapitulation, the TR becomes truncated and is instead replaced with a development of S2. Here, the performer can emphasize the march topic at P with full emphatic playing in strict tempo, and then by clearly bringing out the sudden drop of dynamic to piano leading to the MC with dramatic intensity and an expansion of time, both which are practically possible because the orchestra part drops out. The first movement has no cadenza, but Shostakovich makes up for it by developing the second S theme in the recapitulation. This theme is unusual in that the right-hand part has a simple eighth note melody, whereas the left hand is playing in triplets with a huge leap from the bass to the other notes. The juxtaposition between two contrasting rhythms creates a playful character, as it makes the soloist unable to play hands together, which is a commonly emphasized basic piano technique. The second movement is in ternary form in the key of E minor, not a first or second default key choice for a second movement in relation to the other movements, and it is in triple meter. The triple meter suggests a waltz topic, but the tempo is lento. There is contrapuntal writing that follows, and an unusual burst of consecutive octaves marked appassionato marcatissimo in a bravura topic, leading to a pedal point on B for 10 measures. See example 5. The third movement is a brief one with a cadenza at the beginning and an attacca indication that leads directly to the fourth movement. See example 6. The tempo of the last movement has expressive implications as it relates to the other movements. Hepakoski and Darcy writes that if the finale tempo is faster than that of the first movement, the effect is that of a passage through an effective slow center and sometimes also an escape tonality in order to arrive at an increased acceleration. The slow movement can be understood as a site of transformation, a process to pass through in order to arrive at the heightened spirits of the finale. If that finale is also lighter in tone, style, or structure, more dance-like or nimble, then the linear effect of a multi-movement pathway into an enhanced vivacity is underscored further. In the concerto, the fourth movement is faster than other movements and provides an energetic finale to the work. The fourth movement is in the style of the contradance. It is marked allegro con brio, with an extremely fast tempo, marking of a quarter note equals 184. It is in 2/4 time in the key of C minor, and the piano begins with a repetitive descending motivic figure on the offbeats to a descending chromatic line from D flat to A in the orchestra bass part. Additionally, the motives of the first theme is based on the C minor tonic and contains the G note repeated 11 times. The contradance is a group dance with rural origins. The word comes from the English country dance, and it first entered English upper-class ballrooms in the mid-17th century and replaced the minuet as the most popular ballroom dance in the next century throughout Europe and beyond. Contemporary sources describe it as an, quote, imitation of natural instincts expressed in happiness, end quote, which its features being fast and energetic, simple and relatively easy to perform, of a spirited, playful, and gay character. The contradance core characteristics are its simplicity and clear melodic punctuations, fast tempo, and its low style with rustic associations. It, quote, is usually very lively because of its great simplicity with clearly marked divisions, end quote. The contradance is set in duple meter with 2/4 being the most common. See example 7, which I will demonstrate. Looking at Shostakovich, we can see marked rhythms and divisions with regular quarter notes in the orchestra and the piano part repeating a rhythmic motif of 2 eighth notes, a type quarter note and dotted quarter note, and an eighth note. See example 8. There's a cheerful, simple melody in the first theme, and the fast tempo is illustrated with the tempo mark of quarter note 184, a speed that is physically impossible for performance. So how does the knowledge of the contradance style relate to performance? Because the contradance style has rustic origins, one can either interpret it as simple and plain and perform it in strict tempo, without much inflection or shaping, or choose to interpret it as somewhat unsophisticated, thereby being more varied or irregular with the tempo. I interpret it as being simple, and therefore I emphasize both the first and second beat of each measure, even though only the second beat has an accent marking. It will also be helpful if the performer can internalize the first and second beats of each measure clearly, especially through the rest, to maintain an absolute tempo. Furthermore, the descending chromatic line in the orchestra part might be related to how the contradance is performed. Dancers have to adjust their steps when dancing, either by speeding them up or slowing down, to avoid ending before or after the tune ends. This fast tempo and utter lack of consistency in the dancer's choice of steps leads me to imagine that there must have been a fair share of missteps and even bumping into one another. This could be related to Shostakovich's use of descending chromatic, as if someone was perhaps a little drunk and tipsy with their steps, almost falling over. Additionally, I believe that the choice of the contradance style in the fourth movement in the concerto is an example of humor. The norm of the upper-class concert hall setting versus the violation of the rural style. Even in the dance itself, it is an example of humor, as when it entered the ballrooms. The participation of the upper classes in a simple and spirited dance of such strong rural associations lent it not only a sense of gaiety, but also, according to Daniel Gottlieb Turk, an air bordering on the moderately comic, end quote. The use of the contradance in the fourth movement of a concerto also draws parallels to Mozart's opera buffa, a comic rhetoric style. The style of opera buffa can be defined as having periodic phrasing, tuneful melodies, simple harmonies, spare accompaniment, direct expression, emotional fluidity, strong stylistic contrasts, and amusing mixtures of elements that characterized Italian comic opera became central elements of the international idiom of the later 18th century. Tuneful melodies, simple harmonies, and strong stylistic contrasts are evident in Shostakovich's concerto, especially in the two cadenzas of the fourth movement. Furthermore, Shostakovich alludes to Haydn's Sonata in D major, Hoboken 1634, in measures 82 to 89 of the orchestra part, and to Beethoven's Rage of a Lost Penny, opus 129, in the cadenza of the fourth movement starting from measure 343. Finally, another specific musical example of humor is the sheer repetition of the note of G in the first primary theme of the fourth movement of Shostakovich. One of S.T. Scheinberg's criteria for the different types of irony in music from her book, Irony, Satire, Parody, and the Grotesque in the Music of Shostakovich, a Theory of Musical Incongruities, is incongruities based on meta-stylistic norm. Example, rendering a feeling of too high, too fast, too many repetitions, etc., not when measured relative to a certain style or topic, but per se. An example of incongruity unrelated to style is the excessive repetition of one note in the theme, 11 times in this case. When the piano part receives this theme, the performer can choose to play its repetition as identical as possible, or to give a gradual crescendo to the notes to emphasize the humor of the exact repetition. To conclude in this lecture, I demonstrated through both sonata theory and topic theory that the ambiguous and unique elements of Shostakovich's concerto can be interpreted as humor because of the balancing forces of violating and normal features in the piece. The contrasting styles and topics in the concerto can make it a challenge for the performer and listener to interpret. And it is necessary to understand the allusions to the forms of the past and the disparate topical references that Shostakovich makes to understand and appreciate the message of humor. Further research can be made on the distinctions between humor, sarcasm, irony, and parody, but I hope to have provided here some useful and helpful interpretive insights for scholars and performers alike. To me, Shostakovich contributed to the concerto form by uniting various seemingly disparate topics, of which one can make the metaphor of making the best out of life's circumstances such as war and tragedy. Furthermore, the concerto emphasizes the importance of structural listening and necessitates an awareness of both a larger narrative and the performer's skill in carrying out that role. Amid war, pandemics, and increasing isolation, humor can serve as a solace and to convey hope for more understanding, empathy, and connection. Thank you.